Just an abbreviation for truth, racial healing and transformation. Now imagine having a conversation, practice touchstones and using your I statements. Being fully present when it's your turn to listen. Our community is building and healing through resistance. Truth Talk.
What's up? What's up? Welcome to another Truth Talks. My name is Ed Genesis, the host and co-host. Shouts out to her. Of the Truth Talks platform, which is just a platform that we come together and have real community conversations about what's going on in the community. Today we're talking about journalism, media, and conversation of how community is uplifted by the experts. Before I introduce them, I'm going to go through the touchstones. And the touchstones are just a way that we have respectful conversations within TRHT, which is Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, Kalamazoo. And they are be 100% present, extending and presuming welcome, speak your truth, always by invitation, listen deeply, maintain confidentiality, and even though this is a public conversation, we just don't take things that we discuss within this conversation out of context to repeat them to somebody else. No language of the soul is privilege over any other language of the soul. Value feeling as much as knowing. No fixing, no saving, and no advising. Identify assumptions and suspend judgment. Respect and learn from silence. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. And last but not least, trust the healing process, your heart, and the hearts of others. All right, with that, we're going to go straight into introductions so we can dive straight into this conversation. So to my left, ladies first, if you don't mind.
Okay. I'm Kristie May, managing editor of Now Kalamazoo. And so what that means I do is I, along with Ben, decide what stories we're going to cover, who's going to help us tell those stories, and organize, how we're going to publish the content, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
I'm Ben Lando. I'm founder and publisher of Now Kalamazoo. From Kalamazoo, been a journalist for almost 23 years. And we just started Now Kalamazoo in order to, among other things, really get into using journalism to really get to the root of an issue in which it has importance to the community in which I live.
Absolutely, thank you. So, before we talk about why that's important, why is this an important conversation? Like, of course, we are colleagues, and Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Kalamazoo brought us together under one roof, so to speak. So we share a lot of the same spaces, but when we do the Truth Talks, for one, I get to pick a lot of the content, it's my baby. But there is a lot of input from community and why we get a lot of the topics. Some things I've never heard about until we had Truth Talks and have conversations, such as shouts out to the late, great Ava Alvarez, who broke down Cinco de Mayo in a way that was like, wow, it was just so impactful and informational. We'll be rerunning that this year. That's why it's important to me to tell our own stories, but why is it important that we even have this conversation today? Like, you could have this conversation yourself. I could have just talked with other people and said, do you know there's a such thing as Now? Now Kalamazoo, do you know what it is? But to me, it's important because you are the experts. We rely Kalamazoo residents, especially the populations that are underserved or not as often heard. So it's important that we have this conversation because we're talking to people that I want to know. You all are here. We have experts who's doing it. But why do you think it's important? Or is it? Sure. I don't want to be presumptuous and say.
Well, I think I can speak to why the organization felt, we needed to take action that got us to this conversation right here. You know, when we're our role as it relates to TRHT and narrative change as it relates to journalism and its intersection with gun violence in the community is the issue of gun violence is unfortunately remains there consistently are reasons for it to be discussed on a broad level. Issues that happen just this week in Nashville, you know, a couple weeks ago at Michigan State, as well as in communities for a long time. But one of the if the conversations are about, you know, what are the reasons for it, what are the problems with, what are the solutions to gun violence, and I think too often both the problem and potential solutions don't include the media in this. And so we wanted to get into addressing some of the maybe some of the problems as it relates to gun violence, directly or indirectly, that are caused by how media covers the issue of gun violence, as well as what role it can have in exploring real community-led solutions. And I think that we've tried to adopt that, because as we say, like, we're beginning a pretty broad initiative to cover gun violence. It's a project called Beyond Bullets. We'll have a lot more coming out over the next couple of months as we launch it and publish a lot more stories related to this. But, you know, we're covering gun violence, but we're not covering we're not telling stories about, like, the incident of a gun unfortunately going into somebody. We're trying to cover all the different reasons that led up to that happening in the first place, and what happens afterwards. So kind of the root causes and the potential solutions. And part of that is a self-examination of what's the role that the media can play in being more progressive in discovering solutions and addressing the problems that it has contributed to.
And so I would say that we're here today to let your audience know how we differentiate from how other organizations have done it before. So essentially what Ben is saying is we are here to shake up the local news ecosystem, as you say it. And so I feel like this conversation is necessary to show that there are journalists who are thinking about that, thinking about the role that media has played thus far, and how the ways that could have been damaging, and then reevaluating how we can tell the news. Even Ben, when he was saying we are community-led, in other organizations, I felt like I was top-down. It was top-down approach. It almost felt like I was flying over the city and picking and choosing little sensational moments to kind of tell a bit of the story. But here, I was able to have 3 months, as Ben talks about this gun violence project. He allowed me to take, more than 3 months, but, it started this year, so I'll use January through now, to just research. So that was having conversations with other journalists who have been doing this work in other cities. That's having conversations with advocates and activists who have been doing this work for years, not just coming into someone else's city and pretending like I know everything or I know everybody and I already know the story. I was able to really get context. Me and you had a conversation. I was able to gain context and understand something before I come and report it, really be a part of the community, sit in on some listening sessions, community listening sessions, go to where the action is, where people are meeting up, and just observe, be quiet in the rooms, and just really understand the stories, compared to I'm going to come in really quickly to get my soundbite and go. And so I think we're here to differentiate ourselves.
I love that. So let me say this first of all, like, what's the word that they use? Aesthetically or visibly, I'll say that. Walking into a room to see the diversity of a white man, a black woman working together on media is like, it sets off something, at least within myself, to say, okay, a broad approach. That means it's different, because it's not a white man and a white woman saying we're reporting on everything and we can cover it all. And it's not a black woman and a black man saying we can report on it all. though we need that as well, because what I believe is media, especially when it's more localized and you get those familiar stories and you're not, like you said, flying over the city and just, that was a great analogy, and just plucking sensational stories, then it's more inclusive. So I do want to know how you all came together, but I want to say that for whatever reason, I think it's dope. Just like when you first walk into a room, it's like refreshing. A lot of people say diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's like, and we got a black girl working for it. And, or just token white person. He sits in the back of the room. He doesn't say much, but it's our white ally. It happens a lot. And when there's a grassroots approach, for one, I love that because it's not top down. That means it's like organically just coming up. What's important to me, and I want to lift this up, is being directly impacted. Born and raised in Gary, Indiana. I was kicked out of public schools for taking a gun to school at 16 years old. Nobody asked me why I had the gun. You know, they just assumed that I was causing trouble or something like that. And I was not afraid of a person necessarily, but like I had to explain to a guy on a call the other day, there's a fear when you learn, especially as a black male in America, your place in society, and that's kind of scary. And then when you're in a poverty-stricken community that is plagued by gun violence, the decision to get a gun is like real easy. And nobody was really discussing that part. As the Blocks Club, I created Building Leadership, Organizing Community for Kids to Succeed, and I spoke with Kristie about we lifted up trauma and how that relates to, and we did a series. We'll be doing the third this May. It's a TRutH, which was trauma reducing informed practices, and now it's a TRAP, trauma reducing applied practices, because now that you have the information, what are we doing with it? I think it's important just from that lens, being a father, being a person that lives in the community, that you're taking the time to not pluck a sensational story, but say, well, wait a minute. And let me say, I think it's super dope that both of you said it's like not policing the media, but who's talking about how the media actually plays a part within this all? Surely not the media telling on themselves and saying, so it would take that other. So I just want to just thank you both and also lift you both up for that. I think that's dope. And you both were very intentional about saying that, and I was like, this is awesome. I couldn't wait to, I didn't want to interrupt, but I was like, wow, we need more of that. Checks and balances. So what's some of the things, I was thinking about this question for a minute. I showed this thing to, when I mentor with Gabe for Speaking Forward, we mentor the youth. And one of the things I noticed, or I didn't notice it, is everywhere, it's publicly, but there's a video on YouTube where they start with like 10 media people all saying the same thing, and then it grows. You ever saw this video? And then it ends. It's scary that everybody's reading the script. And when I show this to the youth, for one, they can't believe it. They think I'm making this up, and that's computer. I'm like, let's keep looking. So I'll keep looking, and then one by one it resonates inside, and I'm like, well, who's telling us the truth? And if everybody's saying the same thing, and why is it important to talk about that dog? And it's like 50 stories about Sparky did something. Right. And when somebody steps outside of that, that's radical, as they say. They're independent. I know that there's an importance for that, and I just wanted to lift up, for anybody who don't know what I'm talking about, please look up You can just Google scripted news, I guess, and things will come up. Can we speak about that? Like the importance of having your own voices and creating something like Now Kalamazoo, as opposed to, for prestige, I work here.
Right.
Or and that's not condemning,
Sure.
but
I think the important part of that, there's so many elements that are important to that. And I think Kristie and I both have similar feelings, but also we have very different experiences and perspectives. Is that media ownership and who gets to actually make the decisions and where those decisions made are crucial to understand. One, to understanding the information you're getting, and two, also to help dispel conspiracy theories. Also, because we want to make sure that we're like focusing on the facts, right?
Facts.
And so like the video that you're talking about, I think it's even a little bit more more disturbing than that, because all those, if it's the one that I'm thinking of, all those clips are newsrooms around the country owned by one company. And one of those newsrooms that are in there is here in Kalamazoo.
wow.
One of those TV stations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. So then we have to connect the dots. Like, okay, you're saying this, white dude who started a news organization. So let's like put that on the table too. Like I'm a white dude who started a news organization, and so I think people, should be, rightfully critical in how they consume anything that Now Kalamazoo puts out as well. Hopefully we can, by what we do and how we do it, we earn the trust in that. But, I think I heard on a podcast once, so I would love to be able to claim credit for this, but somebody who was a person of color who started a news organization was interviewed about why they did what they did. And they said that it wasn't so much a problem about facts that were being portrayed in a story. It could be 100% accurate, but it's about how honest the information was as it was presented. And if those facts come from just one perspective, or only one perspective was asked about what happened, then you're only going to get one understanding of what happened in a given story.
That's great.
And so that's what we try to do as we look at stories, and as I started looking from how do we hire people and bring people on to be able to like execute the vision that we have for good community-led coverage. We have to make sure that we don't fall back on some of those traps, even if we are independent and don't own hundreds of TV stations.
Yeah, I don't want to just yet get into a rabbit hole about perspective, because I have a lot to say there, but I do want to first talk about the video, that specific question. I was working in one of the local news stations that made that video that you're talking about. I was in Oregon, Southern Oregon at the time. And first, I want to uplift local journalists, because as Ben was saying, you have to pay attention to who owns what. And in that newsroom I was in, yes, you saw my anchor's face, but behind the scenes, my anchor was fighting to not have to say it in the first place. But eventually she had to give in and be a part of that video. And so there was what was going on behind the scenes amongst us journalists, where we were, fighting, sending as many emails as we could, taking it to whatever boss we could to let them know this was not okay behind the scenes. But what I will put out there is just the importance of media literacy, especially in the age of social media, but just in general. I just encourage everyone to have multiple sources for information, and just, question everything. So without calling any one organization out, I just encourage people to just really have good media literacy and understand what that means, and ask someone, if you're distrusting something, ask someone that you trust, hey, can you read this for me? Or, look up another source with the same subject. I would just say that.
Thank you for that. I think you both broke that down. And we didn't really go down a rabbit hole, but you explained, I think, very eloquently, especially for somebody like me who's not I'm a consumer of news and information, and sometimes I learn from a lot of older black women who primarily raised me would turn the channel a lot of times from the news and say, here we go again. Especially my aunt Doris, my Aunt Doe. She would be livid about a lot of the news, and sometimes, and I remember twice, there were shootings on the east side of Kalamazoo, and it was reported another shooting on the north side. And she said, well, what's going on? And she just hated it. And she wanted to not pay for cable anymore. Like, it would just disrupt her day. That the news, she said this should be the one pure source that you should be able to click on the TV and not get so many opinions or so many pictures differently painted. And this was my great aunt. So she comes from a place where she remembered the separate bathrooms, the separate drinking water fountains, and movies depicted like this. She just felt like news should be in the middle and just fair and just tell the facts.
Right.
But also, like, I can hear her saying what you just said, the journalist shared, which was also a different perspective. Yes, this is true, but did you talk to some of the neighbors or some of the people who actually live in that area? So I think I appreciate you both for lifting that up, and now I got to go here with this. So, because media has become distrusted throughout the years, and a lot of frustration, so by me lifting up the fact that I would watch my mother, my aunts, my grandmother, everybody would get to a point where they'd be like, enough is enough. They'll cut the TV off. I've seen it multiple times. I, in turn, would do that. And I take long breaks of not watching the news and getting my news from other places, because it can be very triggering. And when I say triggering, I don't mean like when they talk about it in a polite way in the room and somebody just says it. I'm trying to say a polite way of being super angry, and I got a way of saying that I don't think would be polite right now. But that's what I'm describing. Like, there's some things that's like, wow, for real? That's us? And when I say us, it's like, that's black people, or that's how you view the north side, or that's how you, wow, and it can be very upsetting. So we're dealing with that and the distrust. To come into that, especially in a place like Kalamazoo, but then you not being from here, and then coming in. For one, I have to applaud your courage, both of you, for saying, I want to do it a little different, and I want to, like, talk about the whole story or whole stories. But why? Like, why? You've been doing it. I want to start with you, Ben. You said 23 years. Why is it important to do Now Kalamazoo?
I remember, I started in radio in Kalamazoo for some of the like commercial radio stations that played like music or talk radio, and I was just a reporter, filling out stories, and also for like Westerns radio stations. I worked for them, and I remember also doing some stuff for the newspaper. I remember just thinking like, one day I want to be able to like choose what I think are like the important stories and be able to do that, and not have to do what other people think are like the important stories, which I've a little bit presumptuous. I was a young person, a little bit partly naive, a little bit of ego, right? But like, but then as I moved out of Kalamazoo, continued to do journalism in different cities, different countries, and then still maintained family here, and came back and realized that I not only want to do that, but I want to do that here because it's not only just fulfilling for me, but it's like important for a community, but then during that period of time and that experience, I came to realize that there was some fundamental problems with media and with journalism. And I wanted to make sure that, well, let me just like double down on what I like kind of put out for myself to do, and make sure like we do it right. Identify those problems and like, oh, I'm not going to do that, or I want to create something that actively, you know, doesn't do something. And part of it is I mean, part of it can be just like someone who started a news organization. It's like a business decision. Mm-hmm. Like historically, media organizations have poorly covered certain communities, certain neighborhoods. And so on a business side, like why would you want to have less customers of your business by not providing them a service? So, but for coverage, you can be doing so much damage. So as a news consumer, when people ask me like, how do you get your news? I say first, I don't watch my news, even though there's great stuff on, you know, Public Media Network, PBS. There's some good news, and there's some good journalists working for some pretty not good news organizations. But like, I don't watch my news. I kind of really select the news that I trust.
Okay.
And then I figure out like, how do I then turn all of that into operational decisions for a news organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And part of that is hiring Kristie and be like, here we go. You know what you're doing. Hand it over. You know, that type of.
Thank you.
I will say, you talk about turning the TV off, your family turning the TV off for news. I quit news. And I will say something that journalists, I will say in my broadcast newsroom, we're ashamed to say, a lot of us would report the news and would go home and not watch it. Kind of reminds me, I think there's like this Netflix documentary where they talk about social media AI and how it's affecting kids, and some of the founders were just like, you know, I don't let my kids consume. So it's kind of like that for us. Like, we'll put it out, but then we were going home and admittedly weren't consuming it because we recognized the hopelessness that we would feel. And so I'll start there, but then I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I am from Birmingham, Alabama. Me and my mom and my baby brother, when we were very young, we lived in Southside Projects, so one of the notorious projects in Birmingham. My mom, though, we always elevated, never went without. I didn't even realize I was from the projects till we were driving back around. I was like, oh, that's where we used to live. And my uncles were like, yeah, Kristie, like, that's the project. I was like, okay. Because eventually my mom moved us to a place called Clear, Alabama, this predominantly white space. I went to a predominantly white school. I had access to different resources. We moved there when I was 9 years old. I was in 4th grade. We spent every weekend, probably afternoon even, going back to Birmingham to see my family. As I grew up, slowly watched the path shift between me and my cousins. I watched the resources that I had, or all of a sudden where I was and the way that I was able to develop, and then the way that my cousins who were, you know, didn't go, their parents were not able to take them where my mother was. And I watched our paths kind of split a little bit. And so when you talk about these news stories with shootings and such, or where does that come from, back in Birmingham, those are my folks. Like, whether it's church, whether it's know somebody through somebody, to me, that's family. You know, I'm looking at a mugshot, I'm like, oh, dang, that's such and such. What happened? I know what happened. I watched the split in resources. But while I'm down here in Calera, I'm also watching my new peers, my new neighbors, make their perceptions based off of these news stories that only show the mugshot of somebody who I might know or love. They only know that part of them. I have all the context of their surroundings, who they really are. As you said, nobody ever asked you, why did I pick up the gun? I have a little bit more of that tacit knowledge that Reggie Moore, when he came into town, he talked about how the journalists there, it was like the opposite of implicit bias. You had this understanding that you didn't even understand that you understood, if that makes sense. And so coming back to today, I'm in news and I want to make a difference. I recognize the discrepancies between what is shown on the news about my people and what I know and understand it to be. And I come in thinking, okay, I'm going to tell the stories that are going to make a difference. And I get to newsrooms and I realize that's not how this works. And to save a really long story and shorten it, I felt really discouraged. I felt discouraged. I, at one point, was working at a news organization where I wasn't the only black woman in the newsroom. I'm the only black woman in the entire building. So imagine you trying to get people to understand something and they come from a completely different background, and not just, you know, you're not just trying to get one person to understand, you're trying to get an entire organization to understand. And so I'll admit, I left. It was tearing me down. I went to work at Western for a little bit in marketing. Ben did a story with my husband. The rest is history, so Ben found me. But ultimately what I realized is everything that Ben just said. He was trying to do things differently, and I realized that, you know, tacit knowledge that I'm talking about needed to be over here with him. And so I gave journalism another chance.
Dope. Yeah.
I think if I could just,
Yes.
something that you said when you were describing a very, I think, common across the country experience, but in Alabama, but it's, I think you could see that here in Kalamazoo, because words, not only is it accuracy matters, but like even the way people, journalists and not, choose words to say themselves, or quotes that they take from somebody, which elevates their, you know, what they say. You know, I'm struck here in Kalamazoo when there's a press conference after, you know, a shooting, or a quote from a leader after a shooting, and they say, you know, they refer to it as senseless, right? Like, that conveys a couple different things. One, that there's no nuance to why somebody has a gun in the first place. Mm-hmm. And two, then that has somebody who's senseless, like, what does that mean about that person? Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's both inaccurate, because it's the opposite of senseless. It's extremely rational. It's logical, even if there's some faulty information that people get and then make decisions off of that. Yeah. And these are, you know, human beings just trying to, like, move toward happiness in the world, right? Like everybody else. And, like, why degrade them by calling them senseless?
Yeah, I dig that, and thank you for that. So going back to Gary, Gary's right, very close to Chicago. Chicago was the birthplace of an organization called the Conservative Vice Lords. The Conservative Vice Lords, this was 1960s, 67, 68. And then in 71, they received a $275,000 Rockefeller grant to become a legit organization, to help out the Lawndale area of Illinois and throughout Chicago. Voting, this is black, and this is, you know, 60s to the 70s. There was also something that they have called COINTELPRO that neutralized a lot of these organizations. And so the Conservative Vice Lords went on to just become the Vice Lords. And if you Google them now, then you'll see that they're called a gang, and that's what they're known as now. And in Gary, the neighborhood where I come from is predominantly Vice Lords. This is all I've ever known growing up. And there's other sides, and there's other so-called gangs or other organizations. One of the things that I lift up, and I have a little smirk on my face now because I love unapologetically exactly what you just said, Ben. There was another side, and the other side was, these were the people that I saw hang the nets up at the court, clean the courts up, tell us not to litter, cleaned up the neighborhood. I never saw the Parks Department in Gary. I saw the Vice Lords do what they did. And it just was the way it was. So there was not a time for me to condemn and not really defend, but tell the other story. Like, well, do you know, like, how they started, and that there is a such thing as COINTELPRO, and that all of these organizations, from the Black Panther Party is for self-defense to Larry Hoover has been locked up since the 80s. all of these black organizations or even white allies who helped black organizations were either killed or jailed, and they put it out there so everybody can see it. And I know that's what I learned growing up. So the local heroes became the people that we saw. But of course, the local heroes a lot of the times were gangsters, thugs, hoodlums, and well, you don't listen to him, and you don't listen. And it's like nobody else is saying it and saying the truth and saying that look at where we live or look at what's really going on. And the fact that you both lifted up, you saw the dynamics of the separation of family. I saw that growing up in Gary and visiting Kalamazoo. And every time I go back home, I was like, it's not like they have a museum in Kalamazoo, and they have like, I was just like, wow. And my cousins and friends there thought I was making up Kalamazoo. Like, where do you really go for spring break? Where do you know? So there's different sides, but you lifted that up, and then being you lifted up, and I thought that was very powerful because it's not senseless to the person that's living it. It's all they know, and they'll protect it to whether it's territory, name, respect. It's not senseless to them. They'll go to prison for that and willingly tell another person, yes, I did that, and I would do it again, because it's a lifestyle. And I know when I carried a gun in Gary, I took it everywhere, which is why I was expelled from school. And I would have shot it anywhere, to avoid being shot or jumped or killed. So that's not senseless to me. And of course it would have been deemed as another senseless shooting in a school or, you know, so let me shut up. I just personally some things come up, and I just really appreciate how you said that, and then the way you talked about moving and seeing the difference, Kristie, I thought was important, because if people don't know that Ben Harbor and St. Joe are twin cities, but there's a stark difference. If you don't know that, then you will judge the people in Ben Harbor. So can we speak more about what else is Now Kalamazoo have coming down the pipeline, so to speak, besides just the different aspects of gun violence? Just shaking it up completely? Because that's what it sounds like, honestly. Something much needed.
Talking about like as an organization,
yes,
or as we focus on?
As an organization.
Sure. We got lots of plans. Lots of plans. I mean, we're
you ain't got to give away no secrets.
No.
But I'm just excited.
No, we're
about,
a small.
Like, okay.
We're like legitimately a small independent news organization, and we started. Our first thing we did was in 2019 was we published a pop-up magazine about the homelessness crisis in Kalamazoo County. This was about a year after what happened in Bronson Park, and it was started based on that. But we, the goal was, okay, folks who are homeless pitch tents in Bronson Park. Like, that's not the story. The story is like, why did this come to be? Like, how does a community like Kalamazoo have this situation, the status? And so we spent almost a year just looking into that, asking those questions and developing stories that kind of provided a full picture on, the realities of the situation, the problems, and the status of a strategy, and then the solutions. And then we saw that that was focusing on one topic and really getting to the root of it, or attempting to get to the root of it, was like a really good thing for journalism. But then 2020, COVID, like everything changed, obviously. So we kind of stayed at it and said, well, how do we then try to create a sustainable, independent news organization at a time when it's difficult to do this? And so we started developing multiple approaches to covering the community all simultaneously. So focusing on some really important uplifting things. So focusing on like local entrepreneurs and like local restaurants and chefs, and just local inspirational people that we think we want to tell other people about to further the inspiration, in the community. Yeah. And then focusing on also as like watchdog journalism, just questioning why things are a certain way and explaining it in an analytical and not a politicized, way, and also, taking public policies and explaining, the roots behind them and potentially ways to improve them or problems with them. And then, so we created this kind of, flow of original stories, and at the same time that we created a newsletter. So we 5 days a week, every weekday, 6 a.m. An email goes out that has our own original content, a roundup of other local news and a roundup of local events, and we send that free to subscribe to on our website, nowkalamazoo.com. And so we're doing that, and then so we're getting into kind of this new thing called Beyond Bullets, where we're trying to provide a lot of context, especially as the community decides how to address the issue, right? Millions of dollars being potentially allocated to solutions to gun violence. So covering that and also covering the stories that really make sure there's like a human element centered when looking at solutions, and we're looking at ways of doing things differently in a community.
Yeah, thank you for that. You want to add anything to that?
No, that's our focus.
Okay, cool.
We've got a lot of other things related, but it's too early to announce those.
Yeah.
That's cool. So let me lift this up. Hip hop is 50 years old this year. Turns 50 in August. Well, it's 50 the whole year, but specifically in August is the birthday. And with that being said, one of the worst things that happened to hip hop was corporate integration. The minute somebody who did not understand the culture, where it came from, drove their limousine into the spaces where it was made and took some of those people out, and they waved at their friends because they thought the limousine was cool, and they went off to this penthouse and they started getting deadlines and told to recreate the same song 20 times, sound more like this, is exactly why I never signed a major deal. And I've had opportunities, at least 3 real opportunities, and especially when my wife would manage me. Shouts out to former Vice Mayor Patrice Griffin. We went coast to coast and would do a lot of shows and a lot of things. And one of the things that I learned was I would be giving up a lot of what I like to do for the sake of something that I never really thought about. So to explain that, I love what hip hop is. I could put words together, and I like to do it. And for family growing up, when they first found out I can do it, yeah, come in here and do the rap thing for your aunties, And then it catches on, you do it for your friends, and that, and they encourage you. And then I started getting to a point where I started recording things and actually like passing out tapes and CDs, and people started saying, you're actually good. But there's a wall that I'm hearing you all describe that a lot of artists run into, which is sign on the dotted line and give up certain things and tell this truth, not the other truth, which is why we hear a lot of death, murder, kill in rap music right now. And you went from hip-hop to rap to they started making subgenres, and the media created gangster rap. And once that's created, now there's a market for it. And you feed that market because it's money. Mm-hmm. And now we have trap music in 2023, which celebrates being trapped in society, basically, because it's not about making money. It's literally about one day I'll go to prison, or one day I'll be shot and killed. One day one of my close friends will be shot and killed. I will make a song about it. I will wear a T-shirt, and we will continue to be in the trap. That's like awful to me. And I celebrate being independent for that reason. Still professional. I've had music placed on over 17 different TV shows and counting, because I'm working on some other things. And then as I see Brother Kenji walk by, I want to shout him out because he schooled us about black comics, and the whole black comic book genre, and how it is completely different from the regular comic book, on purpose, intentionally, to be able to tell the stories in a non-filtered, non-scripted, or you're giving up something. And so I want to shout you out, you both out, for anytime somebody, what they say, rages against the machine, that's important, because the machine pumps out a lot. And I want to lift this up because this is very scary in Kalamazoo County, and I'm going to throw it over to the experts. So what I've ran across, because it's not just black people that don't trust the news, there are white people who don't trust the news, and so they get their, as you lifted up, information from different places sometimes. And it could be the news, or it could be just this box, or sometimes it could be this movie, or this coworker who said, did you know they do that over here? I have a nurse. I was telling you all before coming in, I hate to say I suffer from Crohn's, because it is kind of suffering, but I have Crohn's. Crohn's is like a tear in my lower intestinal tract. It does cause pain, but I lifted that up to say, my nurse was telling me, and she was new to Kalamazoo, that she was warned about certain areas to move to and to not let her kids go to Kalamazoo public schools. It's like that type of information that she didn't get that on the news. She didn't know what news to watch yet. She's getting it from people who, it's opinions, and those are becoming more trusted, like a Facebook page, and it's what they call, we're in the age of misinformation. It's not just conspiracy theories anymore. It's like these things go viral like that. And some of the things are said about people that look like me, and they're professionals that's in spaces, bosses, executive directors, and they don't get their information from some of the scripted news, and some do, which is scary, but some get it from other outlets. What can we do besides subscribing to NowKalamazoo.com? And of course, watch TRutH Talks. Y'all make sure you pay attention, because we got real people on here like this, you know, experts. But what can we do as a community, like to combat, so to speak? And I want to start with you, because you really got me when you said the separation and how you were able to see, like, that still ringing in my ear of like, wow, so everybody doesn't see that. What can we do as a community to be more responsible in the ways that we consume? If you're responsible journalists, how can we be responsible consumers, so to speak?
Okay. Give me a little time to think on the question.
Okay.
I'm the one usually throwing the questions out. How can we be more responsible? I mean, I guess lifting up just what I was saying earlier, when it comes to just questioning everything and really looking at your source. I always say, you know, I follow the money, you know, who's paying the bills at the place where I'm getting my news from, and how could that sway what they may or may not report. There's also some things that you just don't know about. Like, there were things I learned behind the scenes in news that I saw them playing out on television I didn't recognize. But then when I'm behind the scenes and I'm literally hearing in the newsroom assignment editors or executive producers fearful of a certain area, and then you recognize to that fearfulness they have of a certain area, that, you know, implicit bias they may have, how does that seep through their work as journalists, you know? So you may not be able to, I guess, look up every person in the news organization that you're following and then see what their personal beliefs are. But I don't know, I guess that's a heavy question. Read between the lines. I don't know. Follow the money.
I like following the money.
And also, I guess, multiple sources. Multiple
Yeah,
sources. Don't just go to
absolutely.
one source. And even for one story, don't go to one source. Kind of compare how different journalists are telling the stories, and then why that journalist may have said it this way, why did this journalist say it that way, and what am I missing in between that? And, you know, how do I come to my own realization of what that truth is? Because journalism is supposed to be this pinnacle of truth. But as you were saying earlier, yes, there are more people having platforms, and, you know, it's kind of being skewed of what news really is, or even, you know, TikTok is about to overtake Google as far as where people go to just ask simple questions these days. But while there are some things that are truthful on TikTok, there are also some things that are not. So just media literacy.
Yeah, I dig that. And before I go over to you, Ben, I just want to add and lift up, you did it in a respectful way. And some of the people that, whether you're from here or not from here, as a journalist, you did not want to pick sensational stories and just fly over the city. As people living here, you should not want to just dive into seeing something sensational. That's why a lot of people pull out phones to record fights as opposed to checking on people and seeing if they're, hey, break that up, stop, I'm calling the police, I have a phone in my hand, like anything like that, they just record it for the sensationalism, and then it gets a bunch of views because people are doing that. So I think if you can offer that level of respect as a journalist, surely we as consumers can say, I don't want to just pluck from the sky either. And I'm turning that same question over to you, Ben.
Yeah, there's so many, you know, elements to this, right? It's, I mean, as you know, as consumers, and I'm referring to myself as among a news consumer, just like I would consume anything else. Like, why would I choose to consume a certain good or service or a product? Or would I choose to say, oh, I want something, food, clothes, something like that? I'm just going to take whatever the first thing that's offered to me, not question like, oh, is this actually good food, or like, is this quality material? Is it gonna, like, it might look nice, but like I wash it once, it's gonna rip or something like that? And I apply those same standards to the information you consume, not even just news or news sources, but like the information. And I think another element is just like, let's recognize that we collectively are in like the thick of some like really crazy stuff happening right now in terms of the pace of information, the filter or lack of filter of information, and technology, right? As a father, like I can't imagine what my kids are or will be going through in terms of like all this stuff. Like I remember, like I had a TV that like had 13 channels and you clicked it, right? Like that was like the extent of my technology growing up. And now like I have a kid who's like, can I see your phone and swipe? And like, that's like, and so like all those things together mean we have to admit, like, it's not easy to know information. I'm in the industry, so I feel like I have a vast head start on anybody else into like whether I can understand whether to trust a piece of information. But like someone who doesn't, I can't necessarily blame them for struggling to choose or figure out how to choose like what is true and what's not. I would say that recognizing that is the first step, right? And I think once you do that, then you have to say like, what's like the test that I will give to my information? Like, can I? And so for me, it's like, is the thing that I'm being told? Let me recognize I'm being told to think a certain way, whether it's a commercial telling me to buy something or the news telling me to think this neighborhood might not be safe. And are there facts to back that up? And are there things missing from that? And that's something that I think a news consumer or information consumer should do regardless of what platform, whether it's a news website or you know, social media. But also that's something that we do as journalists, is saying like, do we think that this thing that we're about to hit publish on, are we confident that everything we're saying is accurate? And if not, even if it might be like if we hit publish, we're going to get our name in the, you know, in the lights type of thing. Like, is it, like, the thing that we have to do is make sure that it's accurate, regardless of what the end result's going to be. And I think that's something that, you know, journalists hopefully struggle with as well because of the responsibility they have towards a community and the dangers it puts them in if they're wrong.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on, can I just say one more thing? Just something that both of you touched on, and you know, there is a fight for your attention right now, and yours to whoever's listening. There is literally a fight going on for your eyeballs, marketing, ads on things. They want your attention, and so something that you said earlier about, you know, what you have to hold yourself accountable to. What are you giving your attention to? I see the clicks that I would get on certain stories when I worked for these media organizations. I see where all the comments go, and then I see the stories that don't get as much attention. And ironically, I see the comments on those stories that you might think a news organization shouldn't be covering, but they have all these likes and this engagement. And even if one of the comments is, oh, well, this isn't news, you still engaged with it. And then on this other story that, you know, might be a deeper dive or might be something that is harder to consume or confront, there might not be as much attention. So just, you know, hold yourself accountable to what you give that attention to, and just beware that everyone is fighting for it.
Yeah, that was dope. Yeah, that was dope. Thank you for that. Thank you both, honestly. I have something that I want to say. So Kalamazoo County, you mentioned something earlier, Ben, and you touched on it. It seemed like a little bit, Kristie, and I just want to say it. So Kalamazoo County, they're fixing it, but it's like super racist, and it's not hidden. You know, you can see it. You can see it because you can feel it. You can, especially if you're from out of town and you downtown Kalamazoo and you say, well, where do I go? You know, and you look to the left and you look to the right. And that's any race, but if you're a person of color, then it's really like, I don't know if I even belong sometimes. You touched on you said you have to wonder, don't you want more customers? Don't you want customers from over here? And I think about being in Kalamazoo County, and I'm like, no, they don't want customers like me, because they're not talking to me, because they don't think we vote. They don't think my opinion necessarily matters, because we don't have a lot of home ownership or a lot of businesses. So we might report about you, but not necessarily from your perspective or to satisfy you, because you're not our customers. And when you touched on that, following the money and the marketing dollars, and who are you marketing to? If the biggest homeless population in Kalamazoo County is single black mothers, and I was blown away when I learned this, then who are you marketing to? Because I don't see commercials that's marketing to the working class that's trying to keep it going, but their kids are going to school here, and they have the promise, but you're not promised your job, and housing, and a whole bunch of other things that comes up. And I don't want to blame the media that's in place right now and say that they're perpetuating anything that's already in society that exists. But it is refreshing to have you two working on from a different approach. But it's also still to hear from the experts in the industry to know that, wow, this is like everything else. Schools, the food, you know, especially when you made that example, it's like you can eat, they will give you things to feed your children unhealthy, and you won't even know unless you read and do your due diligence as you were lifting up, and sometimes follow the money and see, well, they don't even make food. So what is their interest in? I'm rambling, because it's just so, I know you all can't save everything, but thank you for bringing in something that can shake it up. And that's all I'm hearing is like, wow, this will shake it up a lot, and this is like so great.
We're just getting started too.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking about. And I said I was going to lift up that we have to collaborate and do something this summer, so we can be like on location somewhere. Y'all can be reporting. We'll bring out, we'll talk with Public Media Network and get it recorded, whatever we have to do just to like really lift it up, and then also show more community some of the inner workings of what you all are doing. I would love to do that and learn more. I think that's dope. But shifting back to that following the money, that unhealthy, what are we taking in? Thank y'all for telling us what we can do as consumers, as just regular people, regular residents, non-media, with the media, because I'm asking the experts, but, and of course, NowKalamazoo.com. But as far as shifting our mind state, knowing that we have been eating unhealthy for so long, it's like the diet, or what's the alternatives? I wanted to say the website to not, I'm not being facetious, I'm saying definitely plug in. If we had the tech and we was doing it right, I think it might be, and I'll know later on, but they might run it across the bottom while we're talking and stuff like that. But what's the, as a resident, that when you come into the realization of knowing, wow, I've been fed, maybe not even BS, because I don't want to say go that far, but only starch. You know, now I need to add some different things. And you lifted up, definitely try different sources and things like that. And what I felt when you were saying that was, how did that actually make me feel as a consumer? Did it cause me to think, or was it heavy? Was it heavy on purpose? And these are some of the things that's coming up for me. But to know that we've been in it, and I just want to keep stressing that, we've been on a bad diet. Experts, who, like, I know going forward, we can look at different information, we can look at the different alternatives, but we can't undo or unhear some of that. And the scary part for me is because Kalamazoo County does have deep-rooted racism that has not been corrected all the way yet. I'm turning it over to the experts and saying, like, what does that look like? Coming out of that fog, so to speak, and everybody doesn't have the clarity of saying, not plucking sensationalism. Somebody's been fed that all during COVID, especially when they sat in the house and they just saw gun violence
I see what you're asking. Okay,
increase. And I know I know I kind of yeah, but I was like, we ending right here is like the last one, so that's the.
So
one
help
I
me
was
understand one more time
about.
what the full question is.
Okay, so we've been fed, like I said, I don't want to call it BS, but we've been in an unhealthy state of receiving information, and not just as a society, but just right here in Kalamazoo County. And we also have the distrust of, well, that's why I don't watch anything anymore. And I'm not on social media, and I don't gossip. So everything that I think I know, this is it. But I'm also the executive director of somewhere. I'm also a landlord. I'm also law enforcement. I'm a coach. I'm a teacher. And I got all this unhealthy form of information that has based my way of where I live, where my kids go to school. And like I said, I know we can't unring the bell, but is there something that we can do besides, and like I said, that wasn't just being facetious of saying the plug, definitely go to the different outlets, like Now Kalamazoo. But how do we unring the bell, so to speak? I do want to know, like, how do we start to heal from some of the misinformation, or invite some of the people who don't know that they've been misinformed for 15 plus years and very concentrated during COVID.
Okay.
Did that make more sense?
Yeah, it does. You want to know?
You can go.
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Okay. Well, I think the important part is to just like recognize this is where we're at first, right? So you can be like, the facts are, we're all struggling with this, and then we can make some good decisions. But also, there aren't that many options available, right? Like, we're trying to make it down. We're hoping that the decrease in news coverage in general we bottomed out, and we're as a community, and we're relaunching into more news coverage. I know news organizations, Public Media Network is doing a lot more. WMUK, local radio, I know they're hiring reporters. So there's hope on the horizon, and hopefully we're participating in that. But also, I think recognizing that it's actually not. We're just now really being more aware of it. But this is something that's been happening for a long time. Look, you could go back. Look, why did we end up invading Iraq? Bad information and media not doing their job in many ways, and the politicians of both parties lying to people, straight up lying to people, knowingly passing bad information, knowing that the result's going to be 100,000 people killed.
And
in a
using
different
the
part, right?
media to do it.
Exactly. Or you can go back
following the money.
Following the money, and that's the thing is people they didn't. News organizations are not just recently making money off of the news. The product being the people, right? This has been happening for a long time, going back decades and decades and decades of why. I think that illustrates why certain things are covered in certain ways, why certain things are still covered in certain ways. I mean, I'll just throw a cliche on the table as a white person bringing up Martin Luther King, but like every Martin Luther King Day, like what are the quotes that news organizations or that the spokespeople or the social media arms of institutions, like what do they put out there? They're not talking about just like back then when he was killed. They're not talking about the Poor People's Campaign. Yeah. Right? They're talking about the more happier things, right? And I think that the choices that have been made and what gets covered and how neighborhoods get covered and how people are told what to believe via the media, that's been happening. And now we actually have an opportunity, because we're realizing what's happening and the ability to create content and to consume a lot more content. It's just more broader and potentially more democratic than ever before. So there's a lot of opportunity in our current situation, more so than in previous times. So I think that
just hurt. I appreciate you sharing it, but it's like over here, like sticking, like wow, ratings, and it's supposed to be just.
But once we recognize this, like isn't that also taking power back?
It is, right? It
like,
is. No more ratings.
Like I know what you're trying to tell me. I know what you're trying to show to me, what your goal is. Yeah. So I'm just gonna pick and choose. I can take the information that benefits me. I'm gonna ignore all the rest of the stuff. And I'm gonna do with it for improvement.
It's just as you were explaining it, though, I'm like, wow. That's all I'm thinking about. Is you said the plucking the sensational stories, and then the Martin Luther King Day, and I know the ratings. And everything in between is like intentional. That hurt. That hurts in a way. I'm gonna have to reflect on that one a little bit. Like that stings a little bit. Boys in the Hood, the movie Boys in the Hood. Ice Cube has a part where he said, "Man, I was watching the news, and he ain't say nothing about my brother. And he said either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. And that's like still true to this day. That's pretty messed up. You wanna?
Yeah. I'll say that it can sometimes feel like almost hopeless. So you were asking just as a person, so take away being an expert, how as a person do we kind of change the mindset? And it can sometimes feel hopeless. As a journalist even, so you're talking about the news that you have to depend on. I sometimes question the data that I have to depend on to tell you this story.
Wow.
And how that can even feel hopeless because I have to take into consideration who is included as a research on this data. What were they looking for? How did they interpret things? So you can really take it back to the foundations of things and just kind of drive yourself a little crazy and feeling hopeless. Or even when you talk about Kalamazoo being racist, I moved to Medford, Oregon, and the first thing I saw, the first place I went was a Confederate flag. I had just came from Alabama, and I'm like, I got to come up here to the Pacific Northwest, and y'all aren't even a state, and I have to see this. So, you know, having gone around different places in the country, you recognize that there's some commonalities. And so just kind of getting back to what we can do, I think Ben talked about how just recognizing it, and I think people have recognized. That's why you've now got people turning off the news, whereas before we just consume and think, okay, well, they're saying it, we got to believe it, to where now people are turning it off. We are trying to work to get people back. You do need to consume the news, but let's be honest about what the news needs to be saying. But I would just say on both sides is about intentionality, just being intentional. The same way that you're talking about these systems, they were intentionally put in place. We have to be intentional about unraveling that. And so just, yes, consuming media. And if you don't like to read, I'm sorry. I mean, podcasts and video exist as well. But you do just have to take a second and just read. Like, I always joke with my husband that at the age of 18, and that's if you continue, let's say you graduate high school at 18, that's if you continue and graduate from high school, your job is to learn. And then you're done at 18, and it's almost as if the world says, okay, you know enough, get out here and do. No one's holding you responsible to learn anymore. It becomes your own decision to seek information. And so I think we as people have to be intentional about continuing our education. So that's through the news you consume, that's following the reports that might just be embedded into a news article and actually reading it for yourself. And then following, keep going down that rabbit hole and just consume information. So,
that was we right on time too. That was y'all broke that down very dope. That was the question. I didn't want to make an agenda on purpose. There's certain ones that we do have agendas for. Certain ones I like to tell the guests, like, some of this we got to have organic talks, but I do have some thoughts in my mind, and that was one of the thoughts that was like, I want to wait till last to ask, like, if we've been like damaged, like, what do we do? Because that's a hard question that we ask within the black community, even with going back to the rap and some of the younger generations saying just the most awful things you can imagine. And then there's two sides. We want to teach and mentor and say, hey, you have to do better. You follow the money. Somebody's getting paid off of you saying that and being destructive. And then there's that other side that says this is his reality, sadly. But it can't be the only reality, like you lifted up. And we can't just pluck from, we got a rapper that was shot this many times, let's sign him. And we got this rapper who just got injections and shots, let's sign her. That's my self-interest. Hip-hop, I'm still on an uphill battle with trying to do the best I can with telling the younger generation you can do a lot of different things, but I always think about how do we unring some of those loud bells that have been rung in society's ears. So that was definitely a question I wanted to ask expert journalists. Like, even when they come back, and I won't even name names, but people can Google big journalists have been fired for lying. And it's mind blowing. Like this, one of them was regarded as one of the most trusted people in America when he talks. And he got on there and lied about military, him riding an airplane or something. Y'all know what I'm talking. Yeah, helicopter, whatever he did. But it's like when that happens, it makes you want to go back and question so many other things. So we don't have to jump into that. I think y'all answered that very eloquently of what we can do going forward. I think that is a part of healing. I believe in healing through resistance anyway. So anytime you push back against the machine, a lot of times that is a form of healing. We definitely have to have a part 2. We did have a late start, and so I would like to go deeper into the conversation, but let's do the next one like on location or something what y'all working on. And any last words before we close out?
I guess just my last word is, I know Ben and I talked a lot about how we're trying to change, shake up the local news ecosystem from what we know. But one thing I want to say that I'm very grateful that Ben allows us to do as an organization is we want to hear back from our community as well. Ben is authentic and transparent, and he allows us to be that way as well. And so if you are reading our articles or if you have some insight for us or stories that you think we should cover, we listen to that.
Dope.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And you just,
I
okay.
don't say anything else.
Okay, great. Well, thank y'all definitely for coming and having this conversation and informing myself and the community on different ways that we could be more intentional and going to nowkalamazoo.com. Checking out some unbiased news sources and also checking out the other sources. I thought that was very great that you all lifted up, that it's not just about you all, but definitely is about you all, and thank you. It's refreshing. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us
Thank
on.
you.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, that's been another Truth Talks. Peace. Man, that was dope, y'all. Man, that was dope. Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, like for real. There is a part of me that wants to say, I never know until afterwards. I should have had an agenda for y'all because you could have gave at least 3 of those questions a lot of more thought, because I can tell that when I ask, y'all take it so serious. And I've done that before. I put a young lady on the spot, and she was a teacher. She was like, "Ooh, you should have gave me." I was like, "I know I should have, but